everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Sia Pambile Youth Webinar Series called Co-Creating the Future with Marginalised Young People in South Africa. I'm glad to be here with you and look forward to a productive and insightful discussion. This webinar will follow a structured format, beginning with the panelists each giving some input on the topic. We'll then move on into an open question and answer session where you are welcome to ask questions via the chat box. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and will be available on the Sia Pambile Youth YouTube channel in a few days. This is also where you can catch up on any of the 3 previous webinars you might have missed. We're excited to have such good turnout today. Please continue to introduce yourselves and engage in the chat box. Questions for the panelists will be added to the chat box, can be added to the chat box, and then we'll address them towards the end. So let's get to the webinar. So it started back in 2019 when we started really writing the first version of the funding proposal, which went through a few alterations before we got funded for this work. And I think we were at a bit of an impasse in our work with young people in marginalised communities in South Africa. Many of you will know the Stepping Stones in Creating Futures intervention, which had been really successful working with young people in informal settlements. It had reduced men's perpetration of violence and alcohol use and strengthened women's and men's livelihoods. So really important outcomes, but there were still some gaps. We wanted to see stronger outcomes, particularly for women, but also for men. Our thinking about how to address these gaps led us down a particular road to working much more closely with young people to centralise their knowledge, to centralise the knowledge of NGOs, in this case Project Empower, who've worked on these issues for many years, as well as kind of academic knowledge. The outcome of this thinking was the Sia Pambile Youth Project. We launched in 2020 in KwaZulu-Natal, and this is the final webinar where we share the process of this work, the final intervention we co-developed, Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus, and some of the initial outcomes. So today, I'm really pleased to introduce our presenters who will talk about the process of co-creating this new intervention. Our first speaker, who's actually not here with us here in person because she's in Samoa, is Professor Genevieve Manel. He'll talk a little about what is co-development. Then we'll turn to Laura Washington, who'll describe and discuss the process of co-developing Stepping Stones Creating Futures, and she's the director of Project Empower in South Africa. Then we'll turn to Sibuyile Kaula, who'll really describe what does Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus look like, and he's the operations manager at Project Empower. And 2 of the young people we worked with over the project will talk, so Cindy Nkobo and Jabulani Kwela. They'll talk about their experiences of being involved in it. And then finally, I'll do a quick summary of the initial findings from the project. And as I said, I'm in psychology at the University of Exeter. So let's get going with this initial presentation, which, if everything works as planned, you will soon hear Genevieve's voice coming through your screens. And as we do get this ready, that's right, I just want to quickly make the point that this was a large project team, including researchers at the South African Medical Research Council, University College London in the UK, University of Exeter, Project Empower, and obviously our youth peer research assistants. So hopefully you get the idea that this is a collective work, even though only some of us will be talking about it. So let's go to Genevieve, who will hopefully, through miracles of the internet, start speaking automatically.
Andy, there's no sound.
I have just been informed. Thank you. Let me try this again. It worked. As always, it worked in the practice. Let's try that. See.
White and colleagues.
Go back to the start. And see if we can hear her. Let's go again. Okay. Second time lucky.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Samoa.
Hopefully
it's a real pleasure to
Perfect.
be able to open our webinar on co-design today, even if I can't be there in person. My name is Geneviève Manel, and I'm a professor of social science and global health at the Institute for Global Health at University College London. So I'm going to give a short talk today about why co-production is a unique way of doing research in violence against women, as opposed to how we've traditionally been thinking about intervention development in the field. White and colleagues have put together the 6 Quid framework for intervention development. I think it really provides a useful starting point for developing new intervention ideas into prototypes or specific modules that can then be evaluated using randomized controlled trials. So it's helpful in this way, and we've used it in our intervention as well. But they've outlined 6 steps. So the first is defining and understanding the problem. In traditional intervention development, this often involves needs assessments with relevant stakeholders to understand the underlying problems or the underlying factors that cause the problem of violence. Step 2 is identifying which causal or contextual factors are modifiable. So while some may not be modifiable at all as part of a project, such as poverty, others may be, such as health behaviors. So thinking about what is modifiable, what is changeable as part of the intervention. Step 3 is deciding on the mechanisms of change and drawing these into a program theory. So the program theory, according to White and colleagues, should really include short, medium, long-term actions that can then be taken by the intervention to bring about the changes that are needed, focusing on sort of modifiable factors. Step 4 is clarifying how these will be delivered. So this is really about developing an intervention plan for the intervention. Step 5 is testing the intervention. So this refers to trying it out with the population or in the context where it's needed to see if it has signs that it's working and that it's liked and accepted by everyone in the community. Step 6 is collecting sufficient evidence about effectiveness. So this really refers to pilot trials with pre and post surveys and a control group to be able to see if the intervention is working in the way that it was intended to work. So White and colleagues do suggest co-production as part of this, but it's sort of done in a cursory way without really delving into the theory of co-production and what we're trying to achieve in working with collaborators that differs from just doing it ourselves. So what's the ultimate goal of co-production? I think we need to answer that first before we go much further. So is it to improve the relevance of the intervention for a particular population? Is it to improve uptake and the sustainability of an intervention? Or is it really about addressing the power inequalities between researchers and end users that have stopped these interventions from working in the past? Are there sort of fundamental roadblocks that we need to address in order to improve our understandings of how to begin to solve problems of violence against women and deal with disparities in power between the end user and the researchers themselves? So I think we could easily separate these 4 questions into 2 main groups. The first would focus on pragmatic reasons for doing co-design. So it improves uptake and relevance of interventions. While the alternative approach really takes a more critical, or dare I say decolonial approach to challenging the power relationships that underpin many research practices. And when we look at the literature on co-design within violence against women research, there isn't a lot, but there is some. It also tends to be divided along these same lines between sort of the pragmatic and the critical camps. So while most co-design in violence against women and girls has really focused on consulting with survivors of violence to improve service division, there have also been critiques of this approach for either co-opting the voices of survivors for research objectives and aims, or ultimately alienating people with lived experience through the use of co-production language, which can be rather complex. So there's a small handful of scholars, including ourselves, that are trying to take a different approach, a more critical approach, and really grappling with the power dynamics that are embedded in violence against women and girls research practices and trying to do things differently. So I found this paper by Wake and Lockhart really helpful in developing my own thinking on the topic of co-design and co-production. So they outlined 7 key principles of co-production, with tackling unequal power dynamics really at the top. And this stems from a need to recognize that researchers hold considerable power in defining what knowledge gets prioritized and published. For example, Indigenous ways of knowing and interacting are often quite different from Western or dominant approaches and require far more relationship and consensus building. This is something that I know very well, being based in the Pacific. So Wake and Lockhart argue that we need to address these hierarchies of knowledge production as part of the co-design process. And this is great and really helpful, but how do we actually do this in practice? Through our experiences as a team, we have come up with a few thoughts on how we can concretely address power relations as part of the co-design process. So the first is really recognizing that those we're working with need to also have the confidence and space to have meaningful reflections and analyze their own lived realities to really contribute to the process. So they need to think about and have the space to talk about their own experiences and to shape and form those experiences as part of the group. Second, and related to this, is really the role of storytelling. I think storytelling plays a really important role in developing collective identity. So thinking of all partners of a collaboration as us rather than us and them. So really thinking about us as a collaborative effort in trying to strive towards better goals. And storytelling is really effective at doing that. So third is about interpretation and how we understand concepts as jointly produced. So it means recognizing multiple forms of knowledge and not necessarily privileging one over the other. So thinking of lived experiences and putting those aside with scientific knowledge. So thinking of how these two things come together as part of a cohesive whole rather than one over the other. And fourth is really that awareness that we cannot just have a one-size-fits-all solution, nor can co-production really be everything. So it's about the role of thinking of things like formal evaluation and how formal evaluation requires certain expertise that communities or participating groups may not have, and how that comes into balance with lived experience through scientific knowledge. So this provides really some practical tools that we can build on, but it also helps us move away from just thinking about theoretical ideas of what co-design should do to actually looking at what it does do in practice. Just to conclude, a few thoughts for the future. We really need more co-design in violence against women research because of how it helps us design new interventions that are closer to meeting the needs of marginalized groups. So these groups have really traditionally been difficult for researchers to bring about change in violence outcomes. And we need alternative ways of approaching the issue. Co-design offers that. Co-design also offers means of creating more ethical violence against women research practice. So ultimately, I think that the people affected by violence should be the ones deciding their own future. And so thinking about how co-design allows us to do that and what it offers. I don't think we should ever underestimate the amount of time and flexibility that co-design takes. It needs to very much be an iterative process where the option to change direction is real and we can take other paths or alternative ways of doing things very quickly. So this is as much a call to funders as it is to anyone else. So please be flexible and allow our proposals that are flexible to be granted. So for co-production to work, to really work, we need to be open to discovering new ways of thinking. And what the CM Mbili Youth Project has really taught me is that we still have so much to learn, and that we really need to be open to working through new ideas and new ways of seeing the world. This is really critical. So I'll conclude there, turn it over to the others who would talk about the nitty-gritty of how we actually did this piece of work. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks. And that's a really good start from Geneviève, who unfortunately, it's about 1 a.m. where she is at the moment. So I'll now hand over to Laura Washington, who'll talk a little bit more about the actual process we went through of co-developing the intervention. So Laura, over to you.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Just needing to get rid of. Right. Okay. I'm Laura Washington from Project Empower, and we're an NGO based in Durban, South Africa. Just going to spend a few minutes describing how exactly we followed a co-development process, working with a team of academics from the institutions that Andy's already mentioned, as well as a group of young people from informal settlements and a rural community, to develop an intervention aimed at addressing intimate partner violence. It's going to be a very nuts and bolts presentation, but I hope it will give you some idea of the process we followed and perhaps some of the challenges and difficulties we encountered and how we overcame those. So as I think that we're all aware, South Africa is troubled by a very high prevalence of intimate partner violence, particularly between young heterosexual couples living in informal settlements. At the time of starting this project, has been mentioned, none of the existing interventions, some of which we ourselves had worked on, were effective in addressing all elements of the problem, particularly women's experience of IPV and the poor mental health of young people. The CM Mbili project ran from 2020 to 2024, starting just as South Africa's extremely harsh COVID lockdown was declared. The implementation of the project, which relied on close work with the YPRAs, was interrupted at several points by the pandemic and the lockdowns, but also by the July 2021 attempted insurrection, which shook our province where we were implementing the project and resulted in the loss of more than 300 lives, as well as the April 2022 floods across the province where more than 500 people died and housing and infrastructure were destroyed. So it was certainly a challenging project in an extremely challenging context. The project was implemented in informal settlements in the Durban area and in a rural area close to the border with Mozambique. And from these communities, we selected 17 young people that we refer to as Young Peer Research Assistants, or YPRAs. And 2 of them you will hear from a little bit later in this webinar this afternoon. At the time of being recruited, they were all unemployed and not in the education system and were aged between 18 and 24. None had any prior experience of developing interventions, and only 2, a woman and a man, had previously been involved as participants in an intervention. So the whole concept of an intervention, let alone co-development, was very new to the YPRAs. So I'm going to talk about how we used the 6 squid framework that Geneviève has already outlined to guide our co-development process. And in this slide, you can see the 6 squid on the left, and then how we engaged different members of the team and in what kind of activities. So we started off by using participatory activities to draw YPRAs into a deeper description of and then reflection on their lived realities. And the process moved from problem analysis, step 1, to identifying the factors that were most open to change, step 2, and then building an understanding of what the intervention curriculum could look like, how it could be delivered, and then into the final stages of refining and then limited testing. It's the intensive second step, sort of from the beginning of the first into the second, identifying the factors that can be changed, that I want to focus on in this discussion. It was difficult and challenging and involved, as Geneviève mentioned, a lot of going backwards and forwards, changing direction, discussion between the different team members. And once we'd got that right and co-built theories of change, the rest of the process was much simpler. You may have heard other colleagues in the webinar series speak of the participatory activities that we did with the YPRAs to help them and the rest of the team better understand the issue of violence in young people's relationships and the interaction of these issues and their drivers with the harsh structural exclusion experienced by so many young people in South Africa. The data produced by the YPRAs as part of this step of participatory activities was analyzed by the researchers, and this thematic analysis was presented to the YPRA groups. Earlier in the process, we'd worked with the YPRAs to help them to understand what researchers do, especially the qualitative and quantitative data analysis. And we presented some findings from previous studies to the YPRA for discussion. So when this thematic analysis was completed by the researchers and presented to the YPRAs, they had a reasonable understanding of the methods that had been used to arrive at the analysis, and they were able to engage with the themes. So this slide on screen now shows a composite of the analysis of both men and women's violence risk factors. That's on the left-hand side, with the men at the top and the women at the bottom, and the strategies on the right-hand side used by both groups to reduce violence in their lives. So the thematic analysis was valuable in many respects, but I want to highlight that seeing their lived realities presented in this way really helped build rapport between the researchers and the YPRAs and helped build the YPRA's confidence in the work of the researchers. We then moved into a deeper problem analysis using sticky notes, as you can see on the screen, and the idea of a problem tree to map out the relationship between many different issues related to the central issue of IPV. The idea of a problem tree uses the three parts of the tree, roots, trunk, and branches, to represent different elements in the causal relationships surrounding the issue of IPV. We visualize IPV as being the trunk of the tree. That's the most solid part of it. That's what we can see. The drivers of the IPV, hidden from sight, but absolutely critical to maintaining the structure of the tree. The drivers of IPV are the roots of the tree, and the branches of the tree are the consequences of IPV in people's lives. As you can see, we started off with a real mess of personal, interpersonal, and structural factors. It was difficult to draw the links, and especially to establish causal relations. But we did learn that the YPRAs were acutely aware of the difficulties they faced in their lives, even to the point of sometimes feeling overwhelmed by them. Interestingly, while the YPRAs were able to describe the structural conditions they lived with extremely well, they showed in their analysis of the roots of IPV that they had internalized an ideology of self-blame for many of the personal and interpersonal struggles they faced. And without wanting to be glib, there was a process of consciousness raising for the YPRAs that happened through the course of doing this problem analysis, as they began to see more deeply into the causes of the problems that they faced. The next step was to develop an outcomes tree. This was fairly simple. We had to change the problem cards into positive outcomes. So, for example, high HIV prevalence became an HIV-free generation. But things got much more difficult when we tried to identify change mechanisms, or the transition tree as we spoke of it, how we could move from the current set of problems to these more idealized outcomes. It was easy for the YPRAs to develop positive outcomes for the structural deficits that they lived with. Not always realistic, but they were still able to name them. And this, we think, is because one feature of living in an extremely unequal society, the most unequal country in the world, is that the resources available to the wealthy and privileged are not hidden from the marginalized. Positive changes in relationships between people, within communities, within families, with parents, between friends, and between intimate partners were much more difficult for the YPRAs to identify. Where change mechanisms were identified, these tended to fall back on stereotypical interventions such as more policing, more social workers, more sport facilities, or mass HIV testing and drug and alcohol rehabilitation. These conversations around transitioning from the problems to the solutions extended into multiple sessions. The conversations were recorded and critical moments were transcribed. The conversations were shared with the researchers, as were the transcripts. And the researchers used the realist evaluation framework to develop simple statements that guided us in how we could move from the existing problematic situation into a better and more positive future for young people. From this, the research team and the practitioners developed a draft theory of change for each group of YPRAs. So a different one for urban men, urban women, and rural women. And included, you can see this on the right-hand side of the columns, suggested resources that could affect change in young people's lives. These theories of change were workshopped and confirmed with the YPRAs. On the screen is part of the theory of change for young urban women. Following the confirmation of the theories of change, we tested with the YPRAs sections of already evaluated interventions from different parts of the world that we thought could make some contribution to affecting the changes that we had identified as being within our reach. We facilitated elements of these interventions with groups of YPRAs and followed these sessions with focus group discussions where the YPRAs reflected on the sessions they'd received and how they thought these could contribute to positive change in their life or not. And those discussions were then analyzed, and we moved on to develop a draft curriculum. So in summary, our co-development process, modeled along the lines of the framework of the 6 squid approach, consisted of discussing with YPRAs the researchers' thematic analysis of their participatory activities and lived realities, developing a problem tree, and then a transition tree, and using this information to co-build a theory of change. We tested existing interventions, used comments and the perceptions of the YPRAs about these interventions to compile a curriculum that spoke to the theories of change. And then we went on to step number 8, testing the curriculum with YPRAs and their friends and colleagues, and then moving into the limited trial, which we'll learn a little bit more about now. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions, and I'm handing back to Andy.
Great, thanks, Laura. And as Relay, Cindy and Jabulani get ready, I just want to also emphasize this was not a quick process. It took a number of years to get from those initial kind of problem trees through to those theories of change and then test it. And just to reiterate, if you've got questions for us, which we'll answer at the end, do drop them in to the chat box. So now we are moving across to hear a little about the intervention that was co-developed. And I'll hand over to Swile when he is ready to go. And we'll hear from him and then Cindy and Jabulani about their experiences. Take it away.
Thank you, Andy. As you have introduced me, my name is Swile Kaula. Programs manager at Projects Empower. My presentation today is about the delivery of the Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus and what worked well. And I'll be sharing this presentation with Cindy Ngobo and Jabulani Kwela. So here we will be talking mostly about what went well in the presentation, the approach of the Stepping Stones Creating Futures, and also the reflections from the YPRA or facilitators about their experiences and taking part on the project. So, so this is an intervention that was developed or to address some contextual factors that create risk for young people who live in informal settlements in South Africa. So we recruited friendship groups. So participants were recruited as friends. They chose where they wanted to have their intervention at and at what time. It is a 3-hour sessions. It is also facilitated by a peer, like someone who's also in the same age as the people who are participants. It has 15 sessions. Which is, makes it a bit short. They meet twice a week, same gender. We had 2 peer group sessions whereby both men and women met for specific sessions to discuss some of the burning topics that they have discussed in the previous sessions. So the approach of the Stepping Stones Creating Futures is that we focused on the mental health component of it, because when we did the research, it shows like high extreme of percentages of mental health issues or problems that are faced by young people. So so some of the sessions focused on we had relaxation sessions whereby people were taught or learned how to relax when faced with stress or challenging situations in their lives, how to share their stories, and also encouraged other participants to focus on the positives and encourage their peer participants to focus on the positives and encouraging support, not judge them, and emphasizes more on not focusing on the defeat, but or trauma, but on their resilience in facing the problems and how to overcome their problems. The other approach, we looked at livelihoods as young men and women who were interviewed or being part of the YPRAs pointed out about the struggles that they have in their communities. So there were sessions that focused on current resources that they have access to and how they can utilize those resources to better their lives or to earn more income. We also looked at the IPV, intimate partner violence, the perpetration and those who were being abused, and also through the data that was collected, the percentages were very high of perpetration and the women were being abused. So so here we looked at some of the sessions looked at the gender norms and ways of challenging them, the communication skills, like positive communication in relationship, in order for maybe people when they have problems in their relationships, so that they can either maybe choose to communicate instead of using violence. There was also support, like continued support, because in our discussion, the discussions that women have in their groups, it came out that sometimes in the women's friendship circles that there's a lot of competition, maybe not seeing eye to eye between amongst the groups. So some of some sessions in the intervention were also focused on helping women to develop and practice skills that enable them to kind of support each other more in their relationships or as friends. So that's how the approach is different. The approach of the Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus. And also the added component of it was a WhatsApp group where the friends continued the discussions on WhatsApp, supported by their facilitators until they were able to kind of continue amongst themselves to like communicate on WhatsApp on about different topics, when they can't meet physically. So I will hand over to Cindy Ngobo to talk about her experience as a facilitator.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Ngobo, as I was introduced. I'm going to talk about my experiences as a YPRA and as a facilitator of Stepping Stones Creating Futures. The Sapambili team were different. We felt like we were working with them and they understand and listen to our views. The activities engaged me and encouraged me to do something different every day. I couldn't post one thing every day, and I engage myself. So I engage myself with my families, with friends and families, and with people in general. So it was special for me to facilitate Stepping Stone, creating futures and sharing skills and knowledge more widely. It was great. Thank you. Now I'll be handing over to Jablani Kwela, my colleague.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jablani Kwela, and I would like to share my experience about facilitation and YPRA. So being a part of the family team has changed me. Now I see myself as a person who helpfully and active in my community. Participating in the creation of a manual, I learned to be a good person, respectfully, and to be considerate of others. There need to be more of these platforms whereby young people can meet and discuss about the problems or the challenges they face in their lives. Like Project Empower and academics too, actually. So I hope Stepping Stones and Creating Futures Plus can reach more people, not in my community only, even outside the other communities, the whole South Africa. So now I'd like to call Sweden to conclude.
Thank you, Jablani. Thank you, Cindy. So in conclusion, we witnessed that Stepping Stones and Creating Futures is a very good intervention in these communities, as we saw in the number of attendance. Young people enjoyed it, and also how the YPRAs benefited from it, and also as facilitators in delivering the Stepping Stones Creating Futures. in their communities. So, and also how participants wish that we can continue delivering this intervention in other communities, and also maybe other young people can get the chance to participate in this intervention. So I'd like to thank everyone who participated in creating this, the YPRAs and the academics and the practitioners. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Relay, Cindy and Jabulani for that. So now what we're going to do is move on to hearing some of the results from the pilot, which I'll just quickly present. Just to reiterate, if people do want to ask questions, pop them in the chat box. We should, for once in a webinar, actually have a little bit of time to talk through and answer questions, which is great. So let's get onto this, start sharing. There we go. Okay, so for those of you who want to know the design details, here they are. I'll just quickly point out a few highlights and a few key things we want to look at in here. So you get a sense, we recruited 163 men and 162 women at baseline, about half from the urban informal settlements around Durban and half from the rural community up in northern KZN. And as we've said, we recruited in small little clusters, friendship groups. So those friendship groups range from the smallest was 4, the largest was 8, and the kind of most common size was 5. So really quite small and a bit different to how interventions have been implemented in the past. What we then did once we collected some baseline data was we randomized groups either to receive the intervention, so Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus immediately or later. So we did that. And then the intervention was delivered, as Relay has talked about. And then we collected some endline data. So we went back to the same people and tried to get them to recomplete the questionnaires. Really good retention, as we'd call it, at endline. 96, 97% of men who we recruited at baseline, we followed up with, and 100% of women, which is really down to both the skills of the facilitators and the fieldwork team, who really did a great job. And then for those who didn't receive the intervention immediately in the control, they then received the intervention. And there's about 5 to 6 months between the baseline and the end line, to give you a sense of that. So that's the kind of very technical side of things done. Just to give you a little sense about who are the kind of people we recruited, I'll just point out a few headline messages. I think, at least half, just over half of them are aged 25 years or younger. In terms of education, only half of men and 43% of women had passed matric, which is the high school kind of education. As we kind of have been hinting at throughout, we do know that not many people in informal settlements and in rural communities work because there's simply not work. And that's what was seen in our data in a variety of ways. And in terms of violence, you've already hinted at this, but there are high rates of violence in these communities. So when we look at women's experiences, we see past year physical IPV, 50% of women, about half of women reported that, and 40% of men reported perpetrating it. And just to make it clear, men and women, when we recruited them, aren't in relationships typically, and very few of them with each other. So this discrepancy in numbers isn't a reporting issue that we need to think about much. And also high rates of sexual violence experienced. And as we've been kind of suggesting, also overlapping issues of poor mental health and alcohol use, quite high in these communities. So the recruitment process worked really well to get the young people who most need these kind of interventions. So we're really happy with that, if not with the statistics, which show the big challenges they face. So to get on to the kind of interesting, so this outcomes for the women first. So we'll talk about women and then we'll talk about men. Then we'll compare them back with the original Stepping Stones Creating Futures trial, for those of you who know that, to show where things look a bit different or the same. So let's think about attendance. So for women, we saw really strong attendance, really good attendance. So overall, 81% of women attended 70% of sessions or more. So that was 11 to 15 sessions, so received a really good dose. Slightly more or better attendance in rural communities versus urban communities, which is kind of interesting and something that we can talk about. So what we're going to do now is look at 3 sets of outcomes: IPV, livelihoods, and mental health. And because this is a pilot, what we're looking for isn't necessarily definitive outcomes, this works, yes or no, but rather that we see kind of positive changes on a range of outcomes, all in the right direction, showing a consistency of effect, suggesting that if we were to do this on a larger scale, we might well see positive outcomes. So look at women's IPV outcomes first. Okay, we measured for physical, sexual, emotional, and economic in the past 6 months, and this is women's experiences of these. As you can see, there's a consistent pattern of women who've been allocated to the Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus arm reporting less IPV experience at follow-up compared to the control arm. Now, these are relatively good effect sizes, quite large, quite similar to what you would see in a fully powered trial which is successful, but obviously non-significant. We do, however, see that controlling behaviours, women's experiences of controlling behaviours are significantly reduced. And we know controlling behaviours are kind of one of the mechanisms which can lead to IPV. So while we don't see necessarily significant reductions, we do see this nice pattern of kind of overall effect in the right direction, which is really, really promising. When we turn to women's economic and work outcomes, what we see here is actually a really strong pattern of change where we see a number of markers of earnings, of savings, food insecurity, all improving in the direction we would like. So women in the Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus arm reporting improvements in those, and all of these are significant. On other measures of working in the past 3 months, borrowing because you didn't have enough, or stealing because you didn't have enough in the last month, also moving in the correct direction. So we see here a really strong indication, a really strong kind of marker that women's livelihoods after 5 months were stronger than those in the control group, which is great. And similarly with mental health outcomes for women, we see this really nice pattern and consistent pattern, which is what we like, of outcomes of less women reporting less poor mental health at follow-up. So depression symptoms, emotional dysregulation capabilities, all significantly improved. And even where we don't see significant kind of impacts, we do see things like PTS symptoms, anxiety symptoms, all being reduced for those in the intervention compared to those in the control. Also see an impact on alcohol use, which is really, really good. So I think overall we see these nice set of cohesive findings for IPV, livelihoods, and poor mental health for young women. So I'll now turn to the men, and we can talk about the men and see outcomes there. So attendance. 50% attended 70% of sessions or more, not as strong as the women, certainly, but certainly stronger than we've seen in other interventions. Again, we see this differential outcome between rural men and urban men, where rural young men were much more likely to attend than urban. And so that's something we can pick up if people wanted in the discussion. Why are we seeing the difference between men and women and rural and urban? It's kind of one of those interesting questions. So to now turn to IPV as an outcome. What we see, as with the women, is a nice cohesive set of changes in terms of IPV outcomes. So here we're looking at men's perpetration. So for all of the measures, so physical, sexual, emotional, and economic, we see reductions for those in the intervention compared to those in the control, but only for physical IPV do you see it significantly. We also see improvements in communication. Again, this is the hypothesized pathway through which we think IPV might be reduced. So men reported at endline improved communication with their main partner. So those in the intervention compared to those in the control. So again, a nice set of consistent findings. In terms of livelihoods and work, as with women, we have a nice kind of set of findings where, although not all of them are significantly improved, lots of the key indicators move in the correct directions. So we see earnings increasing and savings increasing for those in the intervention compared to those in the control. We do see some significant improvements in terms of working in the past 3 months and changes in terms of borrowing. So again, given it's a pilot, these are really nice indicators that things are happening and change is happening at this point. However, on men's mental health, this is one of the things, we don't see any kind of impact of Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus on men's mental health. There's not even a consistent pattern of change, and indeed, we don't really see anything. So that's one of those big questions about what's happening there. Again, something you might want to pick up on at the end. I started this webinar kind of briefly mentioning the original Stepping Stones Creating Futures intervention and saying this is, trying to strengthen it is why we started this work. I just wanted to do a quick comparison between the two. What we see for women is a consistent pattern of Stepping Stones Creating Futures plus showing as improvement. Attendance, increased from 31% in the original trial, attending 70% of sessions, to 81%. So that's a clear improvement. In the original Stepping Stones Creating Futures trial, we saw no real impact on women's experiences of IPV, but now we're seeing non-significant reductions with a really quite a good effect size for some of them. Again, mental health in the original trial, no impact. In this newly developed intervention, significant improvements on women's mental health and a range of outcomes in the short run. With livelihoods in the original trial, again, significant improvements of livelihoods, and we see those same significant improvements in this kind of new intervention. It's a really nice cohesive set of results suggesting that we might be seeing a slightly better impact from this new intervention. Overall, with men, quite similar patterns, attendance improves. So just to point out, attendance in the original trial was pretty low, even though it did lead to significant improvements in reducing IPV. And what we've done is almost double, or more than double, the attendance getting of men at those kind of long, more sessions, getting more sessions. So that's really, really important, showing it is a lot more acceptable. We also see a consistent impact on IPV perpetration, including hopefully some larger effect size than we saw in the original trial. Mental health, we've still got no impact on mental health, either in the original or in this updated intervention. And with livelihoods, we saw significant improvements in the original trial, and we are seeing this pattern of improvements in the updated version. So really good kind of positive overall kind of results. But to kind of summarize things, I think what we see is this co-developed intervention, Stepping Stones and Creating Futures Plus, really does seem to benefit young people who live in marginalized communities. And I think the overall Siapambile Youth Project demonstrates the importance of working really closely with young people, practitioners, and academics together in a very detailed and constructive way. There are limits to this pilot. We can talk about those, but I've been hinting about them throughout as I've been talking. What we now need to do is conduct a formal evaluation of Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus, really to address the limitations of the pilot, to see whether these findings are sustained over a longer period, and also see if this is cost effective, as that's something that is really important to government and other people. And just to reiterate, we are the ones who got to do this webinar, but this has been a large team of people, both academics, practitioners, and obviously our youth peer research associates. And yeah, so we'll stop there. We'll hopefully have some questions from the audience, which we look forward to answering. So can I ask Laura and Sfuile to switch on, and then I'll have a look at the question. So thank you. Great, thanks. Okay. So we've got a number of questions. I'll start. Okay, so Laura, I saw you had answered this already in the chat, but have we written up, this is one of our great questions, have we written up the process, and is the curriculum available yet for sharing?
You're asking me, or you're going to answer it yourself?
No, you can answer it. No one wants to hear me anymore.
The curriculum should be available. It doesn't look pretty. It's not laid out and nicely illustrated and everything, but it's usable, and our YPRAs and facilitators were able to use it, and we'd love to share it. And we're busy writing up a paper that describes how we went about the co-development process, and obviously it will be a little bit more elaborate than the presentation today, but it will follow more or less the same outline. So yeah, we look forward to having that ready and available for distribution. Hopefully it'll be accepted some way for publication. Thanks, Andy.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and just reach out to us if you want a rough draft, an edited version of the manual with typos and poorly laid out. Then we've got a question from a previous webinar, and I've seen we've got another one as well. So we'll do this one first. And Sfuile, this one's for you really. Given the different experiences of women and men in the communities, particularly around violence, how is the intervention tailored to address these differences? Could you talk a little about that, please?
Muted, Willa.
Oh, thank you. The intervention is the same intervention for everyone, but the way the sessions are designed are that the questions men answered and engage themselves in discussions as men. So if there's a question, it's asked on both groups, but for men, they answer the questions as men, and the discussion is around, is also discussed as men. They make a discussion as men. So that's how the intervention is designed. So it's not like a different one for women and a different one for men.
I guess this is the sort of the beauty of experiential methodologies, is that you create a framework for discussion. So you decide, okay, we want people to talk about gender norms, and we're going to use these activities and those activities to discuss gender norms. But people generate the content from their own lived experience. And if it's a group of men, they'll address it from their perspective, and the role of the facilitator is to gently question and challenge and get people to look more deeply and analyze their lived realities. So when we're using an experiential methodology for young participants, we don't need to supply them with the content, because the content is generated from their own experiences.
Great, thanks. Yeah. Cool. Okay, moving on to another question. And this one is again one from last week. So Laura, this one's for you. I think. Did the study only include men who are in heterosexual relationships and women also in heterosexual relationships, or did it include men who have sex with men, lesbian women? If not, is there a particular reason why not? And did any of in sessions or in data, did any disclose that there might be same-sex relationships? I can take the second part, but do you want to answer the first part?
Okay, so yeah, thanks for the question. So we understand that we have an epidemic of violence against women, in particular in South Africa, and that epidemic is contextualized within heterosexual relationships. So we were particularly concerned to create an intervention that would support changes within that space of heterosexual partnerships in the communities that we were working with. So obviously we weren't targeting couples directly, but we were certainly looking at people's experiences of heterosexual partnerships. So yeah, that's the space that we came from in designing the intervention. And when recruiting participants to receive the intervention, we spent a lot of time in discussions with groups of people and individuals in the community explaining what the intervention is about. And most people have as I mentioned, no prior experience of receiving an intervention, so they don't really know what it is. Maybe they've got an experience of HIV testing and a little bit of counseling, but an intervention is like an unknown phenomenon. So we have to go into quite a lot of detail, and people tend to be quite skeptical and kind of sign up for just anything, just on your say so. So there's a lot of discussion and quite a lot of sort of revealing of what the intervention will be about. And one of the things that we discuss with participants when we're recruiting them into groups is this is an intervention that is going to help you make positive changes in important areas of your life. For example, livelihoods. That's always a sort of strong draw card because people are struggling with poverty and hunger. And we also discuss how, if we're talking to a group of young men, how this might help create positive changes in your relationship with your girlfriend or your girlfriends, because we know that people have multiple partnerships, and vice versa when we're talking to women, that it'll help strengthen your relationship with your boyfriend. So we sort of position the intervention as speaking to the heterosexual space in that way. Don't actively exclude anyone, don't actively include anybody, but participation is based on how that explanation resonates with the people that we're talking with. Over to you, Andy.
All right, thanks, Laura. And then this kind of question about data. We didn't collect any data on people's sexuality. We asked about kind of number of sexual partners without specifying their sex. And a lot of this is down to the relatively small sample size, where we just can't really use it for much analysis, unfortunately. And again, it's something I think we would do in a larger study where we'd at least measure this. And in current research where we're doing interviews, qualitative interviews at this point, or just finished qualitative interviews with young people from informal settlements, we are trying to explore this and to see how that shape kind of relationships and how to integrate any of the ideas around kind of MSN, lesbian relationships into our work in general. So something we're thinking about. So then a question for Swile: was SSCF Plus piloted in the same communities as the original intervention? Oh, yeah.
I'm hearing you.
The stepping stone, the original stepping stones.
Yeah.
Yes. Not all the communities, but some didn't receive the stepping stones creating future. The original stepping stones creating futures like in Dakota, but Malukazi did receive stepping stones creating futures. So it was a mix of both.
But a new generation of people.
Yes, but none of the people who participated in this were part of that group that received the stepping stones creating futures, the original stepping stones creating futures.
Yeah, cool, thanks. And then another question, maybe we could, Laura, do you want to take this one? Oh, actually, I should, because it's about data collection. Did the YPRAs also collect the baseline and endline survey data? Was that done by other enumerators? And did we use devices? So let me answer that. So no, the team from the SAMRC, we hired some field workers to do the data collection. The YPRAs helped with recruitment, so they kind of went around their communities, approached people to get them to recruit friendship networks. But when it came down to the informed consent process and the data collection, that was done by SAMRC fieldwork staff. And we did use devices. So we'd got on pre-programmed cell phones, we lent them briefly so people could self-complete, which in, I think, one of 3 languages, with the field workers there beside them if needed to assist them. So that's kind of how we did data collection. And again, at Endline, the YPRAs and the other facilitators supported us tracking them down. But in the end, data collection was done by field workers. Just also to say, we had an interesting thing where for the first time we collected data over phones, calling people up where we can get hold of them. So we did that as well. So that was a new thing for us as well. Okay, there's a question here. Can we discuss why we think there were differences in attendance between kind of the rural and the urban, and between women and men? Swile, are you best placed to start that?
Yes, thank you, Andy. Yes, there were differences. For example, in the urban area, men tend to be more mobile. Like there's a lot of movement, like looking for opportunities, like employment opportunities. So the numbers would fluctuate, like drop, and then they'll come back again, something like that. So in the rural area, the difference was also because there are less employment opportunities. Men tend to move like very far away if they are called maybe by their family or relatives. If there's an opportunity in the cities, then they would move. But most of the time, men remained while waiting for that opportunity to come. So there was less movement in the rural area compared to the urban area. So I think that's the reason why the numbers that are different in terms of attendance. Also, maybe that applies to women also.
Yeah, thanks. And Laura, anything to add on to that?
Maybe just a comment about the always higher participation of women. I mean, in our experience with young people, particularly in urban informal settlements, is that women actually just don't work. There aren't work opportunities for them, that the casual labor that is available to men. It involves a lot of heavy lifting and like physically demanding work. And the employment opportunities that are available for women tend not to be given to younger women who also find it difficult to work because they often have children. So yeah, I think we always anticipate having higher attendance levels with young women compared with young men.
Yeah, and then just to, kind of build on that, I think in the original trial, we did look at what factors make you more or less likely to attend, and we'll try and repeat that analysis with this study as well, because we also have attendance for the control arm, so we can see. And, you know, as has already been said, things which made people less likely to attend. So this was just an urban informal settlement, was having moved into the community more recently. So you're much likely, likely to be very mobile. Having worked in the past few months, again, likely to be out working and looking for work. And for women, I think it was having a child, reduced attendance. And I guess one thing which we really tried to do in this version, and this is a lot easier because we had small groups of friends, was give that flexibility to reschedule sessions. And I think if I remember correctly, this was done a lot more with young men who were more likely to change sessions. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, and that's correct, because discussing maybe planning for the session, they'll be the ones who decide like when and how to meet, based on their availability. And if they are not going to meet, they will report early to the facilitator, that maybe because they are friends, they communicate almost every day. So the facilitator would know that, okay, today they are not available because they are attending something, and then they'll schedule another time.
Yeah, so that will help explain why we managed to get up to 50% of men attending, 11 or more sessions, which is pretty good. Yeah, lots of things to talk about in terms of why women, they tended to have a fixed time and stick to it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. They had a fixed time, which was mostly early in the morning, after children have went to school and before they come back from school. So they had that 3 hours between 9 and maybe 12 p.m. and 1 p.m.
Cool. Okay, and then there's a question about, did we also conduct longitudinal qualitative research, and could this explain some of the findings? Yes, is the answer, and we need to look into that properly. And I think, but let's talk about, because I think one of the big differences is this thing about why did the intervention Stepping Stones Creating Futures Plus not impact men's mental health in the same way as women's mental health? Just to give you a sense of the qualitative data that did get collected, we did some interviews at baseline, and then around 5 or 6 months after that, with the same group of young women and young men. I think it was 20 young women and 20 young men. Also did some discussions with the facilitators. And we've just completed some interviews with people who were in the control arm, and so didn't receive the intervention immediately, to understand their experiences of not getting the intervention immediately, and also pick up on some of the questions that came up as we saw the data come in and we looked at the qualitative data. So what are I don't know, everyone's hearing me talk a lot. I don't know, who wants to give a quick answer, and then I'll chip a bit more in about what we did men enjoy the mental health sessions and activities? Laura Sprile, do you want to answer? And then
Did they enjoy it? They say that they did. They sometimes fell asleep during the relaxation exercises. So yes, they enjoyed the mental health exercises that were aimed at helping them to de-stress a little bit and just center. I think there's an element of them reporting that they felt quite self-conscious doing it. So it was fine when everybody is in a group and everyone is doing it together and you got your eyes closed and other people can't really see you. It's another thing when you take that home and try and practice that exercise in your home space where there may be other people and you're afraid that you're going to look pretty odd sitting quietly with your eyes closed for 3 minutes or gazing at a candle. So yeah, there's that thing about whether these are activities that men are comfortable to practice not on their own, like not with the rest of the group, in their own spaces where there may be other people present.
Yeah. Yeah. Swile, anything to add to that?
No. I think Laura spoke about like being able to do the exercise within a group at the time, and then struggles when you take it at home. Like people laughing at you, your partner, and some people that will leave it like, look.
Yeah, so some very kind of material constraints, especially as they intersect with kind of dominant notions of ways young men should behave and what they should do, potentially. And I guess that's another thing that it could also be about. You know, if you haven't had the opportunity to talk about emotions and thoughts often, and given that there's often pressure on men not to, might take a slightly longer time for men to develop a kind of a verbal literacy to speak about their emotions and be comfortable speaking about them amongst groups who, you know, previously they wouldn't have done so. So lots of different potential reasons. And hopefully some of the qualitative data as we analyse it will help us understand it and also look at, do we need to make any revisions to the manual? Another question. This is a bit of a long one. I was wondering, since you saw women in the intervention reporting less controlling behaviours, how do you see the intervention working to reduce controlling behaviours for women, given that this is coming from partners? And also, why don't we do it in men, however? I'm happy to give it an initial go because I've been seeing the question and trying to think of the answer. I think for women, we might see it in a number of ways, and this is something we need to kind of dig into with the qualitative work. I think one of the things could be as women start to build slightly larger economic resources out and about working, it might give them a bit more power. You know, this is what the economists would argue anyway, a bit more power in a relationship, and those kind of boyfriends might see the benefit of women being out and being less controlling as they do get more autonomy. So that could be one thing at play. I don't know if anyone's got any other suggestions for that. Laura, maybe?
I think you took my point, Andy, but I probably expressed it a whole lot better than I was going to. Perhaps there's also and something in the communication skills that people learned. And we find that there's an exercise called I statements, which seem quite, yeah, when you see them in print, they seem quite trite, but they always go down like a hot scone on a cold day. People really enjoy the I statements and find it like a huge contribution to their sort of communication resource kit. So I statements is simply helping people to practice speaking about how they feel about a certain situation and what they would like to see instead of that certain situation. So it may be that women are practicing different communication skills which set a tone for a sort of a different platform of communication in their relationship with their partners. I guess we don't really know, and we need to look into that, and that's where the sort of context and mechanism and outcome way of thinking about change, I think, is quite valuable. So there's a lot of work that we can still do unpacking the answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think SK, anything more to add to it?
I think my point was also around the finance part of it, where both are doing better. I'm reported to be doing better, like kind of improve, like in savings and earnings. So, meaning because I think that's where the staff of control comes in, where the other one doesn't have and the other one has, and there's actually less for both partners. But once there's enough or there's some money coming in and that is being saved, then there's no need to worry and there's less stress to, so it reduces the control and being controlled and violence
Yeah, and that's it. I think at some moments we forget how little people sometimes have, and the importance of building those small resources. I know the impact of our interventions, they are significant and they are increasing women's access to finances. And the pressure on relationships when there are very little is huge. So those small bits, as Fule, you really clearly said, can lead to less pressure, less control in it. I'll just quickly check our list of questions and see if I have missed any out. I think that's all the questions in here. So I think, any final last things either of you want to say before we start the wrap up?
I'm probably speaking for Sibuyile as well as myself and the rest of the Project Empower team in extending a huge thank you to the YPRAs and the young facilitators who so boldly went where no one had been before, sort of engaged with us in this completely unknown partnership. From the beginning, I don't think we even knew what we were doing, and we were testing and trialing as we went along through 3 of probably the most difficult years of KwaZulu-Natal's experience as a province. So thank you to the YPRAs for sticking with us, for contributing, for sharing your lived realities, for being open to the process, and finally to contributing to the delivery of an intervention which does seem to have made a difference in the lives of your peers. We look forward to moving forward with this work.
Thanks, Laura. Fule?
Laura has said it also. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who has attended these webinars.
Thanks. So yeah, let me take this opportunity just to kind of wrap up and thank everyone, as Fule did, for attending, and to the kind of wider team. As Laura and Fule have said, this has not always been the easiest process. So it's been great to get to this point, and wanted to express my thanks to Geneviève, Nabstantia, Laura, Fule, Cindy and Jabulani for their inputs and contributions today. Just a few kind of final things. A link to the evaluation form has been added to the chat, and if you could take some time to provide us with your valuable feedback, that would be great. For those who missed any part of this webinar, wish to revisit it, or watch any of the previous webinars, there have been 4 in total, a recording will be uploaded to the Siapambile Youth YouTube channel. It takes a while for us to do that because it's a surprisingly long process to get long things up. But once again, thank you all for coming, for your participation, and we look forward, as we take this work forward, to engaging with you more going forward. So thank you, everyone.